All right, let's get started here on a Wednesday night. Panther-Lair Show on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. I'm Chris Peak from Panther-Lair.com. You see that website below. It's Pittsburgh.rivals.com, the most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet. Pitt football, basketball, recruiting. You can find it all at Panther-Lair.com. And, of course, message boards where you can interact with hundreds and thousands of other Pitt fans. Pitt fans are certainly lively on the message boards right now for all variety of reasons, good, bad, and everywhere in between, as they typically are. There's not usually any period in the year when the Pitt fans are not fired up, and it's not actually unique to Pitt fans. It's all fans get fired up pretty much all year round, and they go to message boards to talk about it. You know what I mean? Good or bad, and sometimes you get more activity out of the bad. They go to the message boards to talk about it, and that's certainly what we have at Panther-Lair.com. You know, something funny happened earlier today as I was sort of doing some different stuff, looking into different Miami things, getting ready for this, Pitt's regular season finale on Saturday at Miami. And I was looking up something. I was looking for their game notes. So, I mean, colleges will put out game notes every week. It's an official release, and it's got all kinds of information in it. And, some of it is just sort of regurgitated boilerplate stuff. They don't update all season long about the coach's history or this or that. And sometimes they'll just have the same note every week, just update the stat. Pitt hasn't allowed a this or has given up or that or has gotten this or hasn't gotten that. In how many weeks or whatever it is. And they do this. But what's really valuable, kind of at the back of it, is updated statistics. And not just stats. I mean, you can find who the leading passer is. You can find the leading rusher or receiver. You can find all those things online in a lot of different places. And a lot of them are more manageable and easier to navigate than the official school website. I mean, if I'm looking for Pitt's stats, I'll go to Pitt's website, but, There are different places to look, and one of the places to look is the game notes, because it's actually easier, to just sort of open the PDF and leave that open throughout the week to reference whenever you need to reference what the stats are. But they have a few other things in there, like game-by-game stats, just like a box, and it's got all the games, and it lists all the rushing yards, and all the passing yards, and all the points, and all the sacks allowed, and it's got all this and all that, and it's really easy. And then there's another section that has the opponents, like opponents' sacks and opponents' rushing yards. You can just look and be like, Duke had 4 games where they gave up 300-yard passing games to the opponent. You can look that up. It's easy. It's right there in front of you. So I go looking for Miami's game notes, thinking that like any college, Miami does this. They've got their game notes. They don't have game notes. At least not that I can find. No official beginning of the week release that I can find. And maybe it's out there. Maybe I'm just not digging deep enough. But I'm sort of the mind that something that's relevant and useful and information, shouldn't need to be buried all that deep. You shouldn't need to be able to hack into their website to find these things. And there's a section that says game notes, and when you click on that, it's just post-game notes. Like, this was player X's 14th consecutive game with at least 2 tackles or some nonsense like that. I don't want to see that. I want to see Miami's game-by-game opponent rushing totals. I could see that Miami is where are they? They're like 44th in the country in rushing offense or rushing defense. I can see that Miami gave up 200 rushing yards to Clemson last week. I want to see game by game by game. I can see that Miami is 94th in the country in sacks allowed. But I want to see game by game by game. I know Clemson had 5 sacks last weekend, but is the 30 sacks they've allowed, is that all sort of bunched up in 3 games or 4 games, or is that spread out and they really are getting beat for like 3 sacks a game through 11 games? That's what they're averaging, is 2.73 sacks allowed per game, which I can say ranks 94th nationally. So, I mean, obviously some issues with pass protection, and I think part of it is, probably with some of the changes they've had at quarterback. But there again, I'd like to see if a lot of those sacks came in games that Tyler Van Dyke didn't play. I'd like to see if a lot of those sacks came in the last couple of games when he was out, or the other game that he missed earlier in the season. And if it's a product of sort of inexperience and a quarterback who hasn't been on the field all that much, whether it's Jake Garcia or Ja'Cory Brown, getting sacked because they don't really know what they're seeing, whereas Tyler Van Dyke's doing a better job sort of reading the pressure and getting the ball out. I'd like to be able to make those comparisons without having to look through each box score game by game by game. The school could really put this stuff out there. So that's my number one complaint about Miami. I've got a lot of complaints about Miami. That's my number one complaint about Miami. What else is funny, and this is the last thing I'll say about this, is when I was Googling Miami's game notes, right? Miami football game notes. One of the, one of the links is just to Miami's website, MiamiHurricanes.com, /football or whatever it is. And the little blurb that comes up on the Google search results is the most comprehensive coverage of Miami Hurricanes football on the web. So basically they stole my line. Miami stole my tagline. I've been calling this site the most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet for years, right? I think my Twitter account started in like 2009. And I'm pretty sure through that whole time, the bio has said the most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet. How's Miami going to come in? And I'm like, look, you can look around Miami's website and you can tell they don't really give a damn about their online presence because there's stuff that hasn't been updated and there are things that are, like I say, sort of out of date. And you're kind of like, why is this here? There are things you can't find, like the game notes. Where do they get off stealing my tagline that I've been rolling with for like more than a decade? Miami. Bunch of bums. Anywho, that was just a way to burn through a couple minutes while we let everybody sort of filter in. It is Wednesday night. It's the night before Thanksgiving. It's the biggest going out night in, of the year, right? This is what everybody does. They come back to, come back home from college and go out the Wednesday night before. I used to do it when I was in college. I would go back. I grew up in Bloomsburg, Pennsylvania, so I'd go back from Pitt, for a Thanksgiving break and go to, either Hess's Tavern or the good old days and, run into a couple people, see a couple people from across the bar that I maybe didn't necessarily run into. Fun times back then, but I think we're all older. I'm older than that now. I mean, I'm sitting here on the Wednesday night before Thanksgiving doing a Pitt video live stream. And that's not actually complaining about this because if I wasn't doing this live stream, I'd probably be sitting over there like watching TV or something like that and probably falling asleep on the couch, which is typically what I do around this time. Last night's Pitt basketball game was a late one. That was pretty rough. That was past my bedtime. Game tipped off at 8:30. Didn't get home from that one until after 12. So that's a little bit later than I can typically handle. But it was certainly worth it when you get a second half when they basically don't miss. I think they were 20 of 26 from the floor, but 17 of 17 from inside the line. That's a pretty good shooting performance, I gotta say, in the second half. And I got a lot to say about that basketball game, actually, about Pitt's win over Fairleigh Dickinson, what we've seen in the last two games, the win over Alabama State, the win over Fairleigh Dickinson, how we kind of put that in context of, we're still talking about the team that got blown out by West Virginia, that got blown out by Michigan, that couldn't really, hold on and beat VCU. We're still talking about the same team and the same players, but there might be some positive signs there. So I do want to talk about some Pitt basketball tonight. It's hard to ignore when they go 17 of 17 from 2-point range in one half. And what was most remarkable, the best part about it, is that the 17th shot, the 17th attempt from inside the arc was from walk-on guard Aiden Fish. And I think it was like his first basket. He made it. But it didn't like drop easily. It wasn't an easy shot. It was a contested shot and it kind of rolled around, I think a little bit, or bounced around and before it finally went in. And I remember as the shot went up, I remember thinking, no, don't shoot. Don't shoot. Actually, no one shoot. Don't. And if anyone's going to shoot, don't let it be the walk-on guard because you have this 16 of 16 streak. Don't blow it on the last shot in the game, the final minute. But they scored their last field goal. This stat sheet I have doesn't list it. But I mean, I was like, don't do it. Don't do it. And the basket went in and made it 17. So it's kind of great that Aiden Fish was the guy who made the 17th 2-point field goal on 17 attempts last night. It wasn't, just John Hughley finishing again or Jamarius Burton making another basket or anything like that. It was Aiden Fish. So props to him for keeping it alive and for not blowing the streak. So good stuff from Fish there. And speaking of Fish, we have to give a shout out to the Pitt women's volleyball team, number 7 Pitt volleyball team. They beat number 13 Georgia Tech today at the Peterson Event Center. Hopefully you checked out on the Morning Pitt. We've got our Morning Pitt videos we put out every day, Monday through Friday, every morning, right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. And today's video, we talked about the basketball game last night, kind of recapped that one. And then we had an interview with Dan Fisher, Pitt volleyball coach. That's the Fish connection. He goes by Fish, does these great videos on YouTube called The Fish Report, where he kind of interviews his players a little bit. It's pretty interesting stuff. But it was a great conversation with Dan Fisher. And we talked about this game tonight. They were at the Peterson Event Center. They wanted to set an attendance record. I haven't seen if they pulled that off. But they did beat Georgia Tech. They've got one more match in the regular season. They host Boston College at the Field House on Saturday. And then it'll be Selection Sunday. And they'll be a top 16 seed, which means they'll have some home games at the Peterson Event Center, I think on December 2nd and 3rd, I want to say it is. And then, there's an outside chance. I can't keep up with all the different scenarios, but if there's some chaos in the Big Ten, there's a chance that Pitt can end up as a top 4 seed, which allow them to host all the way through. So, or at least, I guess, until the Final Four or something like that. So, exciting times for the Pitt volleyball program. If they beat Boston College on Saturday, they'll clinch the ACC championship. So they've got that going for them, which is nice. Boston College is not very good by the looks of their records, at least. So this should be another match that Pitt can win. Playing, they beat a much better team today in Georgia Tech than they're going to face on Saturday in Boston College. And they should be able to win it and win the ACC again. Another, I think, a 3rd outright ACC championship for Dan Fisher, 4th overall because he shared one as well. Pretty good program they have going there. And probably, I would say, after you get past football and men's basketball, I don't have to think that the women's volleyball program is, it's certainly the most successful program Pitt has right now, but it's probably the most, it's got the most attention. It's got the most interest. They're able to take games and matches to the Peterson Event Center and not fill it, but put a better crowd in there than some of the basketball games. I think that's probably maybe the 3rd most popular program in Pitt athletics. I don't know. Actually, if you're in the live chat here tonight, what do you think? Is Pitt women's volleyball the 3rd most popular program in Pitt athletics right now? Curious what everybody thinks about that. I think it might be. And maybe it's second if you want to say that Pitt men's basketball doesn't deserve to be in the top 2. But I think all the focus here is on Saturday. Pitt regular season finale, chance to get to 8 wins and open the door for a 9-win season with a bowl game. Going to Miami where we know that Pitt has not had a lot of success. And you've seen me recite this stat over and over again. It fascinates me. I was talking to a couple guys last night, Andrew Filipponi and Jeff Hathorn. We were talking about Pitt's struggles playing at Miami. And Filipponi asked me, he said, obviously there was the game in 2014 with James Conner at Miami, but has Pitt ever won at Miami another time in your lifetime? He asked me this. And I said, well, no, because, the last time they won at Miami prior to 2014 was 1963. And I was not alive in 1963, regrettably. I wish I was, but I wasn't. It was like 8 days after the Kennedy assassination. So you've got a win at Miami in 1963, and then the next one doesn't happen for another, do the math here, 37 plus 14, 51 years to 2014. That's a remarkable stretch. Now, they didn't play every year in there, and even leading up to 2014, I think the last time they played at Miami was 2002. I want to say when they were in the Big East together. So you have some gaps in there, and there were some gaps I think a little bit earlier than that as well. So it's not like they've lost 25 in a row at Miami, but they've only won 2 in the last 59 years. So, yeah, there's a bit of a span there. And, to some extent, it's not even about being at Miami. I mean, that's a really, really bad stat, but they've only won 3 out of their last 25 games overall against Miami. And there were good Miami teams and not so good Miami teams in there. You have the 2017 game, of course, Kenny Pickett's debut. You have the 2014 game, which was a regular season finale against a Miami team that had quit. And then you have the 1997 game at Pitt Stadium in September. One of the great one of the great games of Walt Harris's first year, one of the last great games at Pitt Stadium. And there were a few in those last couple years, but that was truly one of the last great games at Pitt Stadium when they upset Miami that night. And that's it out of the last 25 matchups between these two teams. So, yeah, Miami has owned the series. There's no question about it. And a lot of times it's because Miami has simply been better. And sometimes it's just been because Pitt has played worse. Think about the 2019 game. What was the final score there? A 16-12 game? If you hold a team to 16 points, you should win. Conversely, if you only score 12, you're going to lose. And that was exactly what happened in that game. Pitt shouldn't have lost that game. Miami was bowl eligible because they won 6 games in the regular season. Pitt was one of those 6. Pitt was arguably the reason that Miami got bowl eligible, because that was a win that they should not have had. Pitt should have won that game at Heinz Field, but they blew it. Their offense was terrible. It's funny, I brought that up earlier this week, that 2019 offense, was worse by a bunch of metrics and statistics. It was worse than this year's offense. It was. They obviously threw for more yards, but they weren't necessarily better on a yards per attempt basis. They averaged more passing yards per game because they threw the ball a bajillion times. But even because I remember at the time comparing, in the middle of the 2019 season or after the season, comparing it to 2018 with Sean Watson when they ran the ball all the time, when Watson was fired because they couldn't pass well enough. And yards per attempt and some of the other sort of passing stats outside of just volume-based stats, they were remarkably similar. It was almost like in some respects the passing game didn't improve that much. They just did it a whole lot more. And so it's funny to look back at that 2019 season. Mark Whipple's first year at Pitt, Kenny Pickett's second year as a full-time starter. First year working with Whipple, and the offense was awful. They averaged fewer points per game. And, in that case, that season, the offense cost them several games. Certainly cost them the Miami and the Boston College game, even if the defense had a few breakdowns in each of those losses. I would say it was on the offense, kind of like Georgia Tech and Louisville were on the offense this year. Interesting similarities, interesting sort of, parallels with a first-year offensive coordinator. That's neither here nor there, but that was a year where Pitt, Miami was pretty bad. I think they fired their coach that year, and rightfully so. They were a bad team, and Pitt still couldn't beat them. 2020 Miami was a little bit better, but Pitt had no Kenny Pickett, and it was down there, and Joey Yellen. It was a mess. The 2018 game, to be quite honest, Pitt probably should have won. I think, and it's funny to put this all on one guy, but Jimmy Morrissey got hurt, remember, the week before that 2018 finale at Miami. We're talking about road games. Pitt closed the regular season at Miami. Jimmy Morrissey got hurt the week before at Wake Forest when Pitt clinched the Coastal Championship. And he wasn't able to play, and so they had to work Connor Gentino in at center, and it was sort of a bit of a cluster in that finale. And it's hard to say, they lost to Miami because Jimmy Morrissey didn't play. But I've talked to a few people who said, look, there were some things that Miami did defensively that Connor Gentino didn't pick up on and make the right calls to respond and react to, that Jimmy Morrissey would have seen, and Jimmy Morrissey would have reacted to, and Jimmy Morrissey would have gotten them better set up with their protection. It wasn't like Miami did anything too crazy. Pitt just wasn't seeing it. Connor Gentino wasn't seeing it, whereas Jimmy Morrissey would have. And so there's another one. There's probably maybe their best chance at winning down there. The 2016 game was an absolute mess. I think we look back on that 2016 season fondly because of the Clemson game, largely the Penn State game to a significant extent, and just the offense being pretty good, setting records and all that stuff. Well, the reality is they had some real stinkers in there too. I mean, nobody has forgotten North Carolina. They had another near miss at Oklahoma State, and then that Miami game was. What was the other loss that season? I'm drawing a blank. They lost to Carolina, Oklahoma State, Miami. We had a fourth loss. Why am I drawing a blank on this? Who else did they play in 2016? Oh, now I'm going to have to... This is going to make me mad. Hold on, just looking it up. 2016, they lost to... I'm going to be so annoyed when Virginia Tech, of course. Virginia Tech. The, 36-39 game, the push-off game at Heinz Field. That's right. Virginia Tech. They had won 3 in a row. They just won down at Virginia, and they came back and lost that game on, I think it was a Thursday night, too. That's right. I forgot the Virginia Tech game. That's the one that should have... But anyway, yeah, and then the next week was the Miami game. They went down to Miami and just really got blown out. I think they might have returned the opening kickoff for a touchdown, and it just all went downhill from there. Like I said, we look back very favorably on that season. We talk about that as being one of the highlights. It wasn't that good. I shouldn't say it wasn't that good of a season. You got a win over Penn State, and you got a win at Clemson. You're still the last team to beat Clemson at Clemson. It's like a 40-game home winning streak. So we're not going to look back and say that was a bad season, but it had its clunkers. It definitely had its clunkers. But this year's Miami team is one that should be ripe for the picking. This should be a game that Pitt can win. A lot of it's going to hinge on whether or not Tyler Van Dyke plays. Van Dyke has missed the last, I think, 2 games with a shoulder injury, and really he had come back into a game, and I guess it was the Florida State game, I think, and hurt his shoulder after 8 pass attempts. So he's missed the last 2, almost 3 games. He's missed 3 total on the season, almost 4 if you count that one where he came out early. And even in the 8 games he's played, Miami's 3-5 when he started. So it's not even like he's been a huge difference. He hasn't been the difference maker he was expected to be this season. He's still, I think, a really talented quarterback. He's still a really dangerous quarterback. He's still someone you have to be worried about. And if he plays, it's going to be far more challenging to beat Miami than if he doesn't, because Jake Garcia and Ja'Cory Brown have not been good at all. I think Van Dyke has obviously played a lot more than those 2 guys, and he's thrown 4 interceptions. Those 2 combined have thrown 6 in a lot less playing time with a lot fewer pass attempts. So, in a game you're going into where your offense has pretty much struggled for 11 games straight, right? I mean, has there been one game where you say, boy, the offense was really good that day? No, there hasn't been. So you're going against Miami, who's always going to have athleticism on defense. And some of their defensive stats are pretty solid. I think they're 2 behind Pitt in sacks. Like I say, their rush defense is top 45 nationally, sort of upper half, upper third of the ACC. I think they're a good Miami defense, a solid Miami defense with some pretty good playmakers at key positions, which is kind of like what you always get from Miami. So it's going to be a challenge to move the ball. It's going to be a challenge to score. And that means you're going to need to hold Miami down as much as you can, like you did against Virginia, like you did against Syracuse. That gets more challenging if Tyler Van Dyke does play. If he doesn't play, you probably have a little bit of a better chance of pulling that off. But, who knows? The latest talk that I could see was that, they're optimistic he's going to play. They think he can play. They think, he's got a good chance to play this and that. I mean, we'll see. It's, coach speak. I think we've all learned that you don't take anything anyone says seriously when it comes to injuries and availability and that kind of thing. I mean, we see that every week with Pat Narduzzi, right? So we know not to read too much into what coaches say, because they very well, who knows? It could be complete absolute lies. for Pitt is going to come down to scoring. I mean, as always, I mean, they're going to have to, they want to run the ball. They're going to have to run the ball. They're going to have to establish the run. I don't know how many different ways I can say that. It's what they need to do. I kind of put it this way on I guess it was Monday. I wrote a little thing on, it wasn't little, but I wrote a thing on the message board, 20 thoughts from the weekend. I said, look, when they go into Miami, it's going to be what we've seen for the last 11 games of what the winning game plan is for Pitt. Play good defense, run the ball, hope you can get a drive or two where you make a couple pass plays and get it into the end zone and just, embrace the chaos and hang on for dear life. Because that's what it is. That's what this team has been all season. And they pulled it off for 3 games in a row now. They pulled it off against Syracuse. They pulled it off against Virginia. And they somehow squeaked out against Duke last weekend. It's tough to live that way 4 games in a row. Now, I made the case that like last weekend, when you look at some of the things with Duke where they drop a touchdown pass, they have a punt, their returner fumbles and sets you up on a really short field. They go for 2 that ultimately ends up being the difference in the game. There was some luck involved. Now, Pitt certainly gave Duke plenty of gifts in that game as well, but there was some luck involved in Pitt getting that win. But the truth is, the reality is, for the vast majority of college football, if you're going to string together wins, if you're going to try and post like a 5-game winning streak, which I think is what Pitt is aiming for at this point, if you're going to post a 5-game winning streak, at some point in there, you're going to have to get a little lucky. You're not, 90% of college football is not, the teams are not talented enough. They're not just elite enough that they can overcome mistakes just through sheer talent and rattle off a bunch of wins that way. For the most part, most teams have some pretty good players, some solid players, and then a few weak links, some weaknesses, some vulnerabilities. And when you have that, kind of every week can be an adventure. And if you want to go week to week to week to week and keep winning, at some point you're going to have a game where you get lucky because you're just going to make too many mistakes that you can't overcome. Now, Louisville couldn't overcome those mistakes. You know what I mean? They weren't good enough. I mean, first of all, they weren't good enough, and that's why they made those mistakes. And then they weren't good enough to overcome those mistakes. Syracuse and Virginia, Syracuse, they did have the 2 interceptions. Virginia, they didn't turn it over at all. But Duke, that was a game they very well could have lost. You know what I mean? Duke very well could have and maybe should have won that game or at least sent it to overtime. But Pitt got a little lucky. And I think if you're going to string wins together like that, you're going to have to get a little lucky. And that's not a bad thing. I think that's just part of what happens. That's part of how it works. If you're going to have a winning streak of any kind that gets beyond 2 or 3 games. But I don't think you can rely on that happening 2 weeks in a row. And if Pitt wants to win at Miami, I don't think they can rely on just getting lucky. They're going to have to make plays. They're going to have to play great defense. They're going to have to run the ball well. And like I say, 1 or 2 drives where you hit some passes and extend a drive and get to the end zone. Now, I mean, most drives that get to the end zone, you're probably going to be running the ball a lot. You're going to have to make a few plays in the passing game every now and then. And, like I said, I thought they took steps forward in the Carolina game, even in the Virginia game and the Syracuse game. I thought that 3-game stretch, Carolina, Syracuse, Virginia, they took some steps forward in the passing game. They did not take steps forward in the passing game on Saturday against Duke. If anything, it looked like it took a step back, aside from that 2-minute drill at the end of the first half. They need to take a step forward this week. You know what I mean? They need just to show some progress, and ideally early in the game to maybe give them a little bit of confidence. Although they showed some progress early in the game against Virginia, it gave them a little bit of confidence. They didn't do anything again after the first quarter. So who knows? We know who this team is, all right? And I'm going to get into the comments and questions here in a second. But I mean, we know who this Pitt team is. We know what they do, what they can do, what they will do, and what it's going to look like. You know what I mean? We just, like I say, you have to embrace the chaos of it, hang on for dear life, and it helps if you just sort of go try and focus just on the results And try not to get too caught up on how ugly it may look at times, and just hope that when you get to the end of the game, when the clock hits 0, Pitt's got more points than the other team. That's probably your best bet. You might save a little bit of sanity if you don't quite live and die with every pass, but I know that's tough to do. All right, let's get into the chat. I want to see what everybody's talking about tonight. Of course, before we do that, I gotta tell you about our friend Chris Gates. Right, you guys know about Chris Gates. I've been talking about Chris for a while now. He's been a friend for years. I've known him for a long, long time. This man was at the CBI. I have photographic evidence to prove it back in 2012. So that's how long Chris has been around, and probably even before that. He's a great Pitt fan. But more importantly, and why I'm talking to you about him, he's an online fitness coach. He's from Pittsburgh, and he works with people all over the world to build muscle, burn fat, and improve their health through healthy habits with fitness and nutrition. And this is what I love about Chris is, he'll help you achieve whatever goals you're trying to achieve. He'll help you work toward them. But his main emphasis is on improving health, fitness, nutrition, healthy habits. I mean, that's the way to affect real change, long-term sustainable change. And that's what Chris does. And he guides and supports his clients every step of the way. So you just show up, you put in the work, you have confidence that what you're doing is working. Everything is personalized to you when you work with Chris Gates at chrisgatesfitness.com. He personalizes your workout program, your nutritional goals. He does weekly video check-ins, all that kind of stuff. It's all personalized to what you want to accomplish and how you want to approach it. And I mean, obviously, we're heading into a pretty big, stretch of the year where eating is a primary focus. I mean, it's about 9 o'clock right now on Wednesday night. 24 hours from now, we're all going to be sitting around like watching the whatever the late game is, the non-Cowboys, non-Lions game on Thanksgiving night. This is a challenging time of year. It's hard this time of year to stick to your health and your fitness goals. The holiday season often turns into a nutritional free-for-all, and most people end up gaining a bunch of weight between Thanksgiving and New Year's, which means it's a perfect time right now to get on a program, start planning ahead to help you make progress instead of seeing the scale and your health move in the wrong direction. So what you need to do, you need to go to chrisgatesfitness.com, chrisgatesfitness.com. You know how to spell Chris, C-H-R-I-S, Gates, G-A-T-E-S, fitness.com. And if you go and sign up for online coaching, for personalized coaching with Chris, if you mention Panther-Lair, you get 75% off your first month. How cool is that? 75% off your first month of coaching. chrisgatesfitness.com, mention Panther-Lair. Go check him out. He's a great Pitt fan, and he does a great job at what he does. So definitely go check it out, chrisgatesfitness.com. He supports us, and we big time appreciate him. All right, let's see here. The Panther Room says the majority of the national media has Pitt playing Purdue in the Pinstripe Bowl or East Carolina in the Fenway Bowl. Which would you prefer? I was hoping to play Wisconsin in the Pinstripe Bowl. Which would I prefer? Well, I mean, there's a few different angles to what I might prefer when it comes to bowl games. I mean, there's the destination of it, right? And I'm not even sure if I would go to the bowl game this year or not. I went last year. I have this streak. All right. So I started covering Pitt football in 2005. They didn't make a bowl until 2008. They went to the Sun Bowl. I didn't go to that game. At that point, I wasn't traveling. I wasn't traveling to El Paso, and given how that game went, I'm glad I didn't. I didn't go in 2009 when they went to the Tire Bowl or whatever it was in Charlotte, and they beat North Carolina. In 2010, I went, after the 2010 season, I went to the Birmingham Bowl, BBVA Compass Bowl, the first one, the one they actually won. They beat Kentucky. All right, so that's one. First bowl I went to, they won it. So I'm 1-0 in bowls, or Pitt is 1-0 in bowls that I go to. Next year, they played, who did they play, like Ole Miss or SMU. They played Ole Miss and SMU in one of those 2 years, and then the other one in the other year. Back to Birmingham, and it was a loss. Todd Graham's year, lost, 2011. All right. Next year, Paul Chryst's first year, they go back to Birmingham. They play either SMU or Ole Miss, whichever one, loss. We're 1-2 now. Pitt is 1-2 in bowl games that I attend. 2013, Paul Chris goes to the Pizza Bowl. I don't attend that game. Pitt wins, staying at 1-2 when I attend. 2014, Pitt goes down to the Armed Forces Bowl. You know where this is going, right? In Dallas or wherever that place was. They play Houston. You remember how that game went? Yeah, you know, I don't need to give you any details. Pitt lost. Pitt is 1-3 in bowl games that I attend. 2015, the Military Bowl in Annapolis. I go to that one because it's like a 4-hour2drive, very easy to get to, close to Baltimore. I like Baltimore. They played Navy. They lose. 1-4, right? 3-4. Two Birmingham games, the Houston game, and the Military Bowl. 2016, they go to the Pinstripe Bowl and play Northwestern. I attend because I think it would be cool to see a baseball game at Yankee Stadium. It was not cool to see a baseball game at Yankee Stadium. It was freezing cold. The press box was open, and it was a terrible setup for a game, and they lost. 1-5 in bowl games that I attend. 2017, they didn't make a bowl game, so we had no issues there. 2018, they win the ACC Coastal Division, go to the conference championship game. Lose that. I was there for that, but we're not going to count it. Although if we want to go postseason games, we could include that one. Then they go to the Sun Bowl, and I say, I'm going to go to El Paso this time. Lose to Stanford. 1-6 now. I've run out of fingers on the loss hand. 1-6 now. That was 2018. 2019, they go to Detroit. And I say, I'm not going to Detroit. I went to Detroit once. I went for the NCAA tournament in the spring of 2006, I think it was. And they played Bradley. They beat Kent State and then played Bradley. Bradley, who had knocked off Kansas. You know how that went. They lost to Bradley, didn't get out of the first weekend. So 2019, they're playing Eastern Michigan in the Detroit Bowl. I am not going. They win. 2020, they don't go to a bowl game. 2021, they win the ACC championship. Incidentally, if we're just talking all postseason, I didn't go to Charlotte for the ACC championship game. Jim Hammett went from our site, and they won that game. Weird coincidence. But they get selected to go to the Peach Bowl, and I say, man, it's a Peach Bowl. I'm going to the Peach Bowl because, I mean, that's cool. That's a cool experience. I love Atlanta. That'd be cool to go and cover a New Year's Six Bowl. So I go. 1-7 in bowl games that I attend, having lost the last 6 bowl games that I attended. Now, they haven't won that many bowl games over that stretch. Along those stretch of like they're 1-7, but Pitt is 3-7. They've only won like the 2013 and 2019 bowl games. So they, in their last 10 bowl games, they're 3-7. It just so happens that I only attended one of the wins, and it was the first bowl game that I went to. So this is my history with Pitt bowl games and covering games. So truthfully, if you want Pitt to win their bowl game, I should stay home and watch it right here in the Panther-Lair.com offices and do a post-game show afterward. And I mean, that'd be more fun anyway. So when you ask me what would I prefer for a bowl game destination, my first thought is, am I going to go or not? If I'm going to go, I don't want to go back to Yankee Stadium. It was easy to get there. It was not difficult to get there. New York City, of course, always has a lot of good options, a lot of good things that you would want to do and be a part of. But Yankee Stadium is also in the Bronx, so I'd be curious about going to Fenway. I assume it would have another terrible setup because I don't think baseball stadiums are meant to have football games. But I'd be interested to go to Fenway. Truthfully, though, I mean, probably the best thing for Pitt is to get a Power 5 opponent in a bowl game, like a lousy Power 5 opponent. You know what I mean? Which would mean going to the Pinstripe Bowl and getting a Big Ten team. Nobody really cared that they beat Eastern Michigan. Nobody would care if they beat East Carolina or another MAC team or a Conference USA team or something like that. If you can get a win over, I mean, nobody's really going to care if you beat Purdue or even Wisconsin or someone. But if you can at least close with a win over a Power 5 conference team, I think that makes, I don't know, just puts a little bit of a shine on whatever you have here. Whatever you want to, however you want to call this season. If you end up, if you beat Miami on Saturday and you go to the Pinstripe Bowl and beat a Big Ten team to get to 9-4, You've got 2 non-conference Power 5 wins. You finish on a 5-game winning streak. You're 9-4. You've got 20 wins over the course of the last 2 seasons. Pretty good. It's a pretty good place to be, I would say. Pretty solid run. So I guess that's what I would wish for if I was Pitt, or whatever the best thing for Pitt is. That's probably what I would say. Scott Lynch says, way to go, Pitt volleyball. Great victory. Yep, I agree about that. That's it was great for Dan Fisher and the volleyball team to beat Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech's a top 15 program. They're good. So credit to those guys for or credit to those ladies and Coach Fisher for getting the win there. Josh Newark says, should Pitt continue to have punters punt based on situations, or would they be better off sticking with one guy? I think the punter situation at this point, it just kind of is what it is. I think they're going to continue using multiple punters. I think they'll use different guys when different situations call for it. But I think the hope will be for next season to have one guy. And my guess is that'll be Sam Vanderhaar. My guess is that when they get into, my guess is the coaches hope that by the time they get to next August, Sam Vanderhaar has established himself as being capable of punting in all the situations. I thought it was interesting that Pat Narduzzi said Vanderhaar is the guy they go to when they want to kick a sky punt and try and get a lot of hang time. I thought that was interesting because everything we saw sort of in spring camp and training camp, we never really saw Vanderhaar doing that. We saw a lot of the rollouts. We saw a lot of the sort of line drive punts. We saw a lot of the rugby style or, Aussie rule, whatever you want to call it. We never really saw a lot of the just put it up there and give your coverage units a lot of time to get down there and make a tackle. We didn't see that. We didn't see very many of those kinds of punts. So it's interesting that that's his specialty or that's what they want him to do. I think by next August, they'll want Vanderhaar to be capable of doing all of it. And be the main punter is what my guess is. But for now, I think they'll just stick with what they're doing because I can't say it's working, but I think they'll stick with what they're doing because it seems like the only real solution they have. Let's see. Josh Newark asks, does Pitt have a recruit that will be able to compete as a true number 1 wide receiver? As a true freshman? Probably not. I think Lamar Seymour is a really good wide receiver prospect. I know Zion Fowler just decommitted. I think Seymour is the receiver that they like the most in this class. I think he's their, number 1 guy in the class. Is he going to come in and contribute as a true freshman? That'll probably depend on a couple of factors. One, obviously his readiness and talent and, how well he does learning the offense and all of that. But it'll also, depend on who they lose to the transfer portal and if they add any receivers from the transfer portal. Look, I still believe Konate Mumfield can be a number 1 wide receiver. I don't think he's gotten near the opportunities that he needs. I think if you gave him, if you put him in last year's offense, either next to Jordan Addison or in place of Jordan Addison, I think he puts up huge numbers. I don't know if he has an Addison-level season, but I think he puts up huge numbers. I think he's a really good wide receiver. He just hasn't really gotten much of an opportunity. But particularly of late in the last few games, he's been pretty good. And I think, I'm personally of the opinion that next year, year 2 of the offense, if Keaton Slovis comes back and if a number of these receivers come back and they don't lose too much off the offensive line, I think you'll see a much better passing game in 2023 than you saw in 2022. And I think that'll mean better stats for guys like Konate Mumfield, and Bub Means, Jared Wayne if he comes back. I think it'll be better. I don't think you really ever... there's very rare occasions when you go into a season you want to be relying on a freshman wide receiver. Larry Fitzgerald, sure. Jordan Addison, sure. Tyler Boyd, sure. But for the most part, I don't know if they have an Addison, Fitzgerald, Boyd level player in this class. I think Lamar Seymour from Miami is going to be really good. I think he's a really good prospect, but I can't sit here and tell you that I think he's a Fitzgerald, Boyd, Addison level player coming in as a freshman. So I don't think they're going to want to rely on a freshman. I think they're going to want to rely on Konate Mumfield. I think they're going to want Jared Wayne to come back and to be able to rely on him. Bub Means to continue playing his role and then fill out this rotation somehow, whether it's with guys who are here now or guys that they'll add through the portal. Let's see. Mods Are Sensitive. That's a cool name. Says, I saw on one of the Miami blogs, one of their keys to victory was putting pressure on our partner. That's embarrassing. I got to assume you mean punter. But why not? It's worked all season. That's good research on their part, to be honest. If they've researched far enough to see that punting has been maybe they just watched the Duke game last week, where was it Junko just dropped the snap. It wasn't even a bad snap. He just dropped it. But you absolutely should get after Pitt's punter. As much as you can. That's what I would do. Let's see. Oops. G Money says, why didn't the coaches adapt the offense to the strength of players like most coaches do that are successful? You mean like running the ball a lot? That's the strength of these players right now. And I think if you've watched, you guys have all watched this team for 11 games. The offense is absolutely adapted to the strength of the players. Could they do different things that the receivers and tight ends can execute better or fit better with those skill sets? Maybe. Maybe they could do things that fit better with Keaton Slovis' skill set. Maybe. But the strength of this offense, the most reliable thing this offense has is Izzy Abanikanda. The most reliable thing this offense has is the ability to run the ball. It's what they do well. It's what they've done well. It's their best chance for success. And as much as we want to complain about not throwing the ball enough or not having a good enough passing game, and it absolutely should be better than it is, running the ball is still the bread and butter of this offense. That's what it comes down to. And so they are adapting the offense to the strength of the players. They're running it all the time. Royce Beacom says, comment by a Michigan player that Pitt was playing tired has to be taken seriously to some extent. Reference their drop-off of second-half performance in both games. That is coaching, not talent. Sure, Royce, I'll take that, but I think you got to then give them the second half of the last two games. And admittedly, it's a different competition level to be facing Alabama State and Fairleigh Dickinson than when you're facing Michigan and VCU. But the last two games in the second half, they've shot combined in the last two games, they've shot 63.6% from the floor, 43.5% from three, and 78.1% from two in the second half. They've been much, much better in the second half in the last two games than they've been in the first half. And I actually think, sort of one of my thoughts, and Jeff Capel mentioned this last night. He talked about how this was, he said it was the second game where they've had everybody who's should be available actually healthy and out there playing. You know what I mean? It wasn't like when Hughley was missing games or Jamarius Burton missed the Alabama State game or anything like that. They had everybody healthy, they had everybody available, and they actually played with the guys that they intend to play with this season. And I've been thinking about that a lot because I think what you're seeing in the last couple of games, particularly as they're getting on the court together more, is a core forming, a real core. And that core is Nelly Cummings, Jamarius Burton, Blake Hinson, and John Hughley. Those four guys, I think at various points in each of the last two games, have made some big plays to sort of take control. You go back to the Alabama State game, Pitt's down 12, I want to say, with like 6 minutes to go in the first half. Hughley and Hinson took over. Pitt went on a 13-4 run to end the first half. Hughley and Hinson combined to score 11 of those 13 points. they took over and really kind of and that carried over into the second half when Pitt ultimately pulled away. And I think you saw the same thing last night at the Peterson Event Center, where it was like a 7-point game at halftime. I mean, it's not close, but it felt closer than 7. It felt like Fairleigh Dickinson was far more in that game than they should have been, and far more in that game than a 7-point score would indicate. But those 4 guys, Hinson, Hughley, last night particularly was, Jamarius Burton, Nelly Cummings, they all sort of made plays to take control of the game. Now, if you're at Pitt in an ACC school, you should be able to take control of a game against Fairleigh Dickinson. That's going to get tougher when you're playing Northwestern or Vanderbilt, and certainly once you get into the ACC, that's going to get more challenging. But seeing these guys do it, seeing these guys take situations that could have been a little bit dicey. In both of these games, there were points where you said, seriously, are you really doing this? Are you really doing this? Because I don't want you to do this. Why are you doing this? Why are you losing to Alabama State? Why are you playing it so close against Fairleigh Dickinson? And there were points where you got that sort of sense of dread. But those guys, those 4 that I talked about, and it might be one of them, it might be 2 or 3 or all 4, started doing things to take control back and to push that dread away. You know what I mean? And eliminate the fear of a possible upset and disastrous loss. And so it's interesting to see that core develop. And I think as John Hughley continues to get back into shape and get more time on the court with those other 3, with Hinson and Burton and Cummings. I mean, he's played with Burton a lot, but Cummings and Hinson are 2 new faces who have pretty strong playing styles that John Hughley's going to have to adapt to and adjust to as he sort of figures out how it can benefit him. And it will. I think the way Cummings plays and I think the way Hinson plays will benefit Hughley. And as he kind of gets settled in and playing with those guys, I think that core can be a strong foundation for this team. And then, you're going to need Greg Elliott to hit shots. You're going to need Nike Samani to do some things. And, certainly like how Jorge Diaz-Graham is developing. But that core 4 is really, I'm very intrigued with how they're coming together. Let's see. I asked a question earlier about is Pitt volleyball the 3rd most popular sport at Pitt right now, behind football and men's basketball? And Scott Lynch says, as far as success, yes, but soccer and wrestling is also pretty good these days. Yeah, and that's absolutely right. Wrestling's off to a really impressive start so far. Both soccer programs had a great fall. So, absolutely. I think there's a lot of success in the Pitt Athletic Department right now. It's a question of what draws the most interest among those programs. And I feel like it might be volleyball. But as we get into the winter, maybe it'll shift and wrestling will become the real attraction. Mods are sensitive. Again, it's a weird username. Says, the rumors about Slovis transferring are getting louder and louder. What will Pitt do for quarterback next season? I don't think he's going to transfer. That option's there. He could. Keaton Slovis could go as a grad transfer or use a one-time transfer. I don't think he's going to transfer. And anything can change between now and whenever, but I think he's going to be here or he's going to try his luck, which seems like an unadvisable decision. I think it would make the most sense for him to spend another year working in an offensive system, learning the system, getting better at the system, being more capable of executing the system, which is kind of a pro-style offense. I think in what they do with the passing game, I think that would benefit him the most, and it would make the most sense for him. But we'll see. If he goes, then I think they will go to the transfer market and they'll see what they can find in the portal. And, there'll be a competition with probably Nate Yarnell, unless Nick Patty decides to come back as well. Let's see. Voodoo IPA says, I'm smoking a 14-pound turkey tomorrow. Do I base it in bourbon, scotch, or whiskey? Holy smokes. You're basting your turkey in bourbon? Seems like you would have to use a lot of bourbon to do that. Is that what people do? Do they smoke turkeys in bourbon? They baste turkeys with bourbon? I don't know. I've never done that before. So the most adventurous I ever got, we grilled a turkey a couple years ago. The the COVID year when everybody had Thanksgiving by themselves, just with their nuclear family in the home. We decided we'd try something different, so we grilled the turkey, which effectively was the same thing as smoking. But the most adventurous part of that was the spatchcock. We spatchcocked that turkey, and I tell you, having never worked a spatchcock before, it was an interesting experience in the spatchcock, because one of the key elements of the spatchcock is ripping the spine out of the turkey. I've never ripped a spine out of anything. And so ripping a spine out of a turkey in order to spatchcock it was interesting. And then I just stood there with this spine in my hand. I'm like, the hell do I do with this spine now? I've spatchcocked the turkey. What do I do with the spine? So that was interesting. Gave it to a friend. I think he made gravy with it. Let's see here. Scroll down. William Schroeder says, do you think Jared Wayne is ready for the NFL, or would it be better to come back one more year? I think, I don't know. I don't know. I'm not a great judge of NFL readiness. My personal opinion is he could, if Pitt's passing game takes a step forward next year, if Keaton Slovis comes back and most of the offensive linemen come back, the guys who can, and you've got Frank Signetti working his second year of the offense, I think there's a chance for the passing game to take a big step forward, in which case Jared Wayne could have a really big year if he came back. I could also see him looking at it and saying, it doesn't matter. Like right now, I've got film of myself playing pretty well. Then I'll just need to go and test well and get a chance. I've got good size. I've shown that I have good hands. I've run a whole variety of routes over the course of my career between Whipple's offense and Signetti's offense. So I'm going to go, hope to get an invite to the Combine or the Senior Bowl, and none of that. Then Pro Day, where I'll test and I'll work really hard to test well. And then hopefully my size and wherever my testing numbers are a good enough combination to get me an opportunity in the NFL. I could see him saying that. I don't know what his thought process is. I don't know where his head's at. I feel like most of the offensive guys on Pitt's, on Pitt's team this year, if they have a chance to come back, probably should, because other than Izzy Abanikanda, just because who really had a good year other than Izzy Abanikanda. Let's see. Mark Shilaju says, I'd rather wait to see if Phil Dracovic transfers. Seems like Boston College has moved on to a younger quarterback, and he thrived in Signetti's offense. Yeah, but do you want him, though? I don't know. I think he's a really talented player. I think he's been good at points in his career. He's dealt with injuries, and he had the transfer. He obviously knows Frank Signetti's offense. He's worked in it before, but, I don't know. I don't know if he'd be a good fit. Is he a guy we're talking about if he's not from Western Pennsylvania? Maybe because of his connection to working with Signetti, but not so sure. I don't know. Look, the thing I do know right now is, and this is going to be the case every year, there's so many moving parts. There's so many different pieces shifting around that it's really hard as you come to the end of the season and early in the offseason to project what a team is going to look like in the coming season. It's really tough because you just don't know what pieces are going to go where. You can't tell. And that's, it's tricky and it's a whole new world and it makes it so it's hard to say, well, I think their offense will get better, or I think their offense is going to take a step back, or their defense will do this or do that. And it's tough to say because you just don't know what the roster is going to look like. And one guy going may cause another guy to go, or one guy staying may cause another guy to leave. Or there's so many moving parts, and one thing is going to affect another. And you might think you know exactly what's going to happen right now. You may have the most reliable sources in the world telling you right now exactly what is going to happen with every one of these guys, and they could change their minds next week or after, the bowl game or whenever it is. And we haven't even gotten into the conversation of who might play in the bowl game. It's all up in the air. It's all up in the air. But one thing you can always count on is the Panther-Lair Show. We do it every Wednesday night right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. You can follow the live stream. It's always a lot of fun. We appreciate everybody who tunes in. Listen, make sure you like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Turn on notifications so you get an alert sent to your phone anytime we go live. We will be live after the Miami game on Saturday. Who knows what time that's going to be? Probably like midnight or something. So you want to subscribe to our YouTube channel and turn on the notifications so you don't miss the start of that live show. I'm sure it'll be interesting one way or the other. We'll have plenty to talk about. And of course, we have the morning pit right here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com every day, Monday through Friday, every morning. Post a new video just talking about whatever's going on in the world of Pitt sports. We won't have one tomorrow. We will not have a morning pit on Thursday morning, Thanksgiving. We're going to take that day off, and we appreciate everyone for understanding that. It is Thanksgiving coming up. I hope everyone has a nice holiday. Enjoy it with family and friends. Eat a lot of good food. Take it easy, relax, and save up your energy to get ready to, get ready for whatever Pitt gives you on Friday night. There's a basketball game, or on Saturday night, but there's a basketball game on Friday night, so we'll have some coverage from that as well at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com and Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. Thanks so much to everybody who joined the live chat tonight. It was a lot of fun. Thanks to everybody who watched this video later in the week or whenever you check it out. We appreciate you. Hope you have a happy and healthy and safe Thanksgiving. And we will be back Friday morning for a morning pit right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.